Hello, and welcome to today's e-seminar, iPad and the Enterprise, How to Build a Sustainable Digital Strategy. My name is Julie Fook. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Quark. I'll be moderating today's e-seminar, and Gavin Drake, our Vice President of Marketing, will be the main presenter. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. First, you'll receive a follow-up email with links to the archived recording and the presentation. And we'll also be sending you a white paper entitled Apps in the Enterprise. Also, if you're using VoIP, please do use your headset for optimal audio quality. And finally, we will be answering questions throughout the e-seminar, so please go ahead and send in your questions as we move along. You can use the control panel in the GoToWebinar screen. And if we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you via email to make sure your questions get answered. So let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda. Today we're going to talk about four main things. First, we'll start with a brief overview of some of the ways companies are using the iPad for business. And Gavin's going to go ahead and give a brief demo or walkthrough of some of the examples that are out there today. Then we'll look at requirements specific to enterprise deployments of iPad apps that you'll want to consider when developing your iPad strategy. Third, we'll turn to the core discussion on options for getting to the iPad, beginning with some options to get you there now, and then larger business questions you'll want to consider to help assess what a sustainable approach to iPad publishing can look like. And then finally, Gavin's going to run through an overview of Quark's iPad publishing solutions. So without further ado, Gavin, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Julie. So hopefully from today's title and from the agenda, you've got a good sense for what we're going to cover. Our primary focus is certainly going to be towards organizations that are not traditional publishers, that are corporate environment users of the iPad, but I'm sure there's content here that will be equally applicable and useful and interesting if you are a publisher. We're certainly also not going to get into details of iPad design, and we do have a lot of information regards that on our website. So if that's an aspect of getting to the iPad that you're interested in, go and check out perhaps some of our App Studio videos that we have online, both on our website and on the Quark Express 9 YouTube channel. Now, we covered a number of statistics before we started today that you'll have seen in the intro slides. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the why you may want to go to the iPad. We'll talk primarily today about the how. But this is one I wanted to put up, which is an IDG Connect survey, iPad for Business Survey 2012, and it just shows the number of professionals who use their iPad at work and for communication. And you can see they are some stunningly high numbers. The reality is probably most of those are using the iPad for email, for web browsing, perhaps for note-taking. What I want to talk about today is not that use of the iPad, but the use of the iPad around custom-developed apps for particular companies. Now, the hardware on the iPad is undoubtedly one of the big drivers of its success, but Apple would certainly recognize that apps are the other big driver of success for the iPad. We really break apps when we talk about the enterprise into a couple of categories. Ones that are external facing, that are for customers, or perhaps they're for investors or other stakeholders in the business. And those are typically being used for customer communication, to improve customer loyalty, and for overall brand development. The other category of apps that's perhaps less well known publicly are internal ones that are focused on employees. So an increasing number of salespeople that are using iPads in the field as one of their sales tools. In a retail environment where a retail assistant may be using it to access the latest product information or campaign data. In fact, anyone that needs real-time access to content while they're on their feet. And that could be people that are internal to an organization or external. So to make that a little bit more real, these are some of the examples that are obviously more of the types of enterprise apps that we're talking about. So customer-facing ones could be magazines, annual reports, research reports, product documentation, product catalogs, as I mentioned, interactive sales presentations and product tours, even ebooks on particular areas if that organization wants to prove themselves to be a thought leader. And then on the employee-facing side, management reporting and dashboards is certainly a big and growing use. Technical documentation, sales support material, and service manuals for people that are out in the field. As I said, there are other examples, but just wanted to give you a sense for the kinds of apps that enterprises are creating right now. And rather than talk about those in any more detail, I thought the better option would be just to show you a few examples to get the ideas generating on what you might be doing with iPads yourselves internally. So I'll just switch across to my iPad. So annual reports is one kind of enterprise app that I mentioned. Let's go ahead and take a look at one of those. And you can see this is a highly customized report. We'll switch that sound off. And if you're doing an annual report, that is something that, because you do it once a year, you can probably make a reasonable investment in terms of the brand and how you want to convey that. And if I go into the app, you'll see that that rich media theme continues as I navigate around the content for the app. Let's look at something that's at the other end of the spectrum in terms of it being designed specifically for the iPad. And this particular one is available in a couple of languages, in English, but as well as in German. But if I go ahead and open that up, you'll see that it is more like a PDF on the iPad. In fact, even the orientation here is just fixed into portrait mode. And if we go through the app and just look at some of the pages, it does have some nice app-specific features in it. So, for example, bookmarks, full text search, and I can also switch to double page spreads or single pages. But beyond that, really, it's not too much more than taking an existing print document and putting that onto the iPad. Magazines, another enterprise app. There are B2C magazines like this consumer magazine that Ford do. I think they have around 28 million subscribers or recipients of the Ford Motoring magazine. And for an organization like Ford, you can see this is a huge opportunity for them to further their brand and ultimately to drive sales of their vehicles. And they've done a good job of incorporating, some great features beyond a magazine that you wouldn't get into a printed publication, but you can in a digital environment. More on the business-to-business side of magazines, here's one from Smith & Nephew on medical devices. And again, it's nicely designed. Just because it's a B2B publication, that doesn't mean it should be badly designed. This is really well put together. It has some great interactive features in here. And you can see things that are very much specific to the iPad that you wouldn't see in a printed publication, even down to features like 360-degree interaction. One of those other consumer apps we looked at in terms of business drivers was Revenue. This is one that is directly driving revenue because it's a consumer magazine or a consumer catalog. And if we go inside there, you can see I've got products I can buy. I can click on the shop icon. It will take me to the online store where I can actually go ahead and buy whatever those items are inside of that catalog. Another kind of catalog would be a product catalog. I'm going to go and open up this manufacturing product catalog, and the amount of content inside this product catalog would probably be hundreds of pages of printed content. So this is a great way to distribute this content. We're going to have a look at one of the sections. I can see detailed product information, diagrams on the product itself, and a great approach if you have a lot of existing, for example, PDF content. You may not want to invest in turning all of that into native iPad content. But here you can see they've used a hybrid where they've got some native features, but if I click here, I can access a detailed PDF for this product as well. And in this case, they even have some video content. Again, content that already existed and they could therefore easily incorporate into their iPad app. And another thing that you'll want to think about in your apps is, Are there features that aren't available out of the box, but I can get to very easily via web controls? So for example, there's an ROI calculator here that is embedded inside this app that enables me to do real-time ROI calculations on this product. Something that's slightly more templated, just to show you, is this Standard & Poor's Credit Matters special report. And if you're doing high volumes of publishing, then you can obviously see the advantage to doing something that is more of a standardized layout in terms of being able to automate that process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we look at sustainability. Something completely different here is an iPhone app, and this is using RSS content, which could be text, news content, could be videos, could be images, but a more appropriate medium for certain types of content. This is for a ski resort in Europe. And then the last app I want to show you is something that is very internally focused. The challenge with internal apps is obviously they're not available for all of us to go and download from the App Store. But this would be an example of an internal app that you might use for equipping your sales team to get access to sales resources. And this particular one is actually Quark's internal app that we use for getting resources out to our sales team. So I'm looking here at my local iPad at local offline content, so I don't have to be online to see this. We have video content that we can play directly inside of this app. In this case, it's a customer case study on the Irish government. We can include PDFs. PowerPoint presentations you can see there as well, and even rich media apps. So this one here, Extreme Publishing, is an iPad app that's produced with our Quark's App Studio product, and you can see I can even embed those inside of this app to be able to distribute them to my sales team. Now that's my local files, but now I'm going to click this server button and we'll just have a look and see what's available on the server. So I can now browse this. Depending on who I'm logged in as, I'll see different content here. I could go to my manufacturing sector here and I can see resources that are available to me as a salesperson in the manufacturing sector, and I can go and grab one of those. Maybe I want to grab this Microsoft Word document, go down and go ahead and download that, and you'll see that will open up for me and is also now available offline for me as well. So you can control and decide whether you automatically push updates to your sales team so that they always have the latest version, or whether they just get informed and it says, you know, there's a new version of this document available, would you like to download it? And just to illustrate the point that this is secure and user authenticated, here are the server settings that are entered that give me access to that content based on my roles and responsibilities. So now let's take a look at what it takes to get those apps to the iPad. And we see it as a three-step process. So firstly, identify your business goals, then look at what your key requirements are going to be, what are your must-haves, what are your nice-to-haves, and then based on that, what are the best implementation options for your business. Business goals break into four high-level areas, and there's lots of variations on these, but am I looking to generate new revenue? For example, the catalog iPad app that I showed you, or that could be indirect revenue generation. For example, I know some of the car magazines and apps have done a really good job of driving customer test drives at some of their retail outlets, and obviously those test drives then convert into car sales. Increasing customer satisfaction and customer loyalty, and related to that, obviously brand. Speed of delivery of information to employees. That's obviously a big deal if you are out in the field, either a salesperson looking for the latest information and video content and presentations, or more critically, a field engineer that may be out trying to service some piece of hardware and needs to be confident they have the latest technical documentation in their hands and the latest service manuals. And cost reduction is still a big part of iPad deployment in the enterprise. If you look at an example of one of the airlines that is switching out their flight bags for iPads, there are some substantial savings, and that includes millions and millions of sheets of paper that no longer need to get printed, and it includes reduction in fuel costs because of the lighter load of carrying an iPad compared to the flight bags. So cost reduction, don't underestimate how big a part that can play as well in an organization. Now, your requirements are broken into a couple of buckets here. So I've got the first one is general requirements. And I think these apply whether you are an individual designer looking to create an iPad app, a publisher, or a large enterprise. These are all things that you're going to think about. Do I need a branded app? There are solutions for getting you onto the iPad very quick and very cheap, but the sacrifice might be that you don't have your own homepage icon. How important is that? Is my content ready for the iPad? That is as much about how quickly you're going to get there as anything. If you already have a customer magazine in a completed printed format, that may not be a long bar for you to take that and turn that into an iPad app, particularly if you have rich media already that you can add to add some additional value beyond the printed content. How important is design control and user experience? A lot of that will be defined by the kind of budget that you want to invest and the tools that you're going to use. Will my app and content be free or paid? So certainly there are a large number of free apps that you'll find on the App Store. There are also apps that are free to download but will charge you for in-app purchasing. Do I want to be in the newsstand? Do I need to have subscriptions for my content? And what resources do I have? How many people do I have? What IT resources? And what kind of budget do I have to invest? With an unlimited budget and unlimited time, there is pretty much no limit to what you can do on the iPad, but most of us don't have unlimited time or unlimited budget. So that's clearly going to be a constraint when you look at your requirements. The second area of requirements very much are enterprise specific. So for example, do I require security? Do I need user level authentication as I log into my app? Are there any regulatory compliance issues that are associated with the content I'm publishing? Certain industries are regulated, and how confident can I be that the information that's in there has the correct disclosures and I'm not going to get into trouble with the authorities as a result? Do I need to integrate my app with internal or external IT systems? Certainly if you're doing real-time data streaming that's coming from a financial system, that may well be the case. How quickly do I need to get updated and new content into my iPad app? Does my iPad content need to be consistent with other sources of information? And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through the e-seminar, but chances are if you're publishing magazine type content, annual reports, research reports, catalogs, all of those things will exist in other media. They're not being created just to the iPad. So how guaranteed do I need to ensure that the consistency is between those other data sources? And do I need to provide an internal app? And if I'm going to deploy an internal app, how do I get that to my organization outside of the App Store? And we'll just take a slight detour here to talk about Apple's iOS developer programs. There are two that are going to be most appropriate to you as an enterprise. There is an iOS developer program. You'll see there's an individual and a company membership there. And there's also an iOS developer enterprise program. So if you want to be in Apple's public-facing App Store, then you're going to need to take out that iOS developer program at $99. That is a company application. So you're certainly going to need multiple people in the organization that will be involved in that process. And then the iOS Developer Enterprise Program, that's if you want to deploy your apps internally. Bear in mind that those two programs are independent, so you can't just take out the developer program, Enterprise Developer Program, and get access to the App Store. If you want to be in both the App Store and have your own internal apps, you'll need to take out both of those memberships. The big difference with the enterprise program is number one on this list, which is distribute your in-house apps. So that gives you the ability to distribute apps outside of the App Store. You'll also see you get code level technical support, and how important that is to you will depend on the kind of route you go down for creating your apps. So looking at that, as I said, it's $299 a year. But the big thing it gives you is the ability to do secure access to your apps. And there are a couple of mechanisms for doing that. One would be wirelessly or over-the-air distribution, where you set up a secure URL that your employees can access the apps. You are responsible for creating that app store, for distributing your app. There is no branded option that you slap your logo on. You're going to have to create that probably with your web and IT team and add your own authentication mechanism as part of that. But that does mean that's completely under your control. And the other big advantage is if you have employees that have their own iPads or employees that are out in the field, this means you can get apps to them without them having to connect their iPad to a computer in order to download those apps. The other method that you can use to distribute apps internally is the ad hoc distribution, which is manual installation. But as that says, that is manual, and you wouldn't want to do that for more than probably half a dozen iPads. If you've got 1,000 iPads deployed, that's not going to be a great method for getting apps to your employees.
So Gavin, let's pause here for a moment and talk a little bit more about these Apple developer programs. There's some questions in here. For example, who within an organization typically would be the one to either request or set up those accounts?
Great question. Probably depends on the organization, because you can really only have one of these Apple developer accounts per organization, or one of the iOS developer accounts and one enterprise program account. And in fact, Apple do check that. So if you try to apply under the same company name with the same registration number multiple times, chances are they will call you and prevent that. So that could be IT that's initiating that, or it could be a line of business owner, or it could even be a project manager. It really probably depends on where the ultimate deployment of that app will be. So for example, if it was an app being driven by marketing, it could well even be the marketing team. But the first thing you'd want to do is check and see whether your company already has one of those developer accounts in place. And bear in mind that when you set up those developer accounts, you can set up multiple users and you can assign different access rights to the different users in the organization.
Okay, so it sounds like you also just answered this question as well, which is, if you have more than one app, do you only need one Apple Enterprise ID?
Yes, you only need one enterprise ID, irrespective of how many apps you need.
Okay, and one final question on this topic, which is, are there regional concerns to be aware of? So, for example, can you make your single app available in all app stores worldwide, or what types of options or choices might there be?
So if you're going down the route of putting an app in the Apple App Store, then yes, when you publish, you can absolutely choose which locations you want to publish that app to. So you could have an app that's only available, for example, in the German Apple Store, and that's fully supported, or you could have a German app that you make available and visible everywhere.
Great. Okay, no more questions in the queue.
The last question that was on my list was, is it sustainable? And you saw some great looking apps that I showed you, but some of those have a huge amount of custom work that went into building those. And a question of whether or not building those apps is sustainable is just a question of volume. And when I say volume, it's not just the number of apps you create, it's how many app platforms do you want those apps to be available on. And as I mentioned earlier, what other channels are you publishing to? Now, it could be that there is content that you are creating exclusively for the iPad, but chances are you're also publishing those annual reports or those research reports or those product manuals to print, to web, to other mobile devices, to email. And so that volume question doesn't just apply to the iPad. This becomes yet another media that you need to try and publish to efficiently. How many publication and reports do you create? Do you do 12 monthly issues of a customer magazine a year? Okay, that's maybe not a high volume. Or do you do 1,000 research reports that need to be out in a timely manner? How many languages? Is it just English or French, German, Japanese, Italian, Spanish? And what kind of frequency are you publishing to the iPad? And by frequency, that could be the the frequency of updates to your app. It could be the frequency of updates to the content within your app, but it could also be, are you doing real-time content publishing inside of that app as well?
Right. Gavin, if I can just underline the point that you made on this slide here, because I think it's really going to be key as you move throughout this presentation, which is the question of volume isn't just about the volume of your digital publishing and, say, the frequency with which you're going to, push your information to the iPad, but the frequency or the quantity of publishing you're doing really across your business. Look at the different functions or groups within the company that are publishing across all channels today, and also which departments are trying to publish to the iPad to get their information there and make it accessible either internally or externally. Because as you'll see as the conversation progresses here, in order to develop that sustainable strategy, you have to justify the cost and the resources for your digital publishing, because it does not happen in a vacuum.
Yeah, absolutely. And as that image illustrates, it really is a question between hand building and highly automated. And this chart illustrates that a little bit further. You need to plot where you think you're going to be on this axis between low and high volume, and therefore between handcrafted and automated. You can see I've marked 2 of those quadrants as inefficient. If you are doing low volume, you don't want to invest in a highly automated solution. If you're doing high volume, you don't want to handcraft everything you do. I think that goes without saying, but definitely worth pointing out. So we'll start by looking in that lower left quadrant and looking at handcrafted low volume. And in that case, the recommendation would probably be to look at desktop software solutions, and I'm going to look at some different approaches that you might take there. Now, even if you're a large enterprise that is doing a high volume of content, there may be good reasons that you want to go down this desktop software route. For example, you might do that one-off annual report that absolutely has to be hand-touched and handcrafted. Or perhaps you've got an urgent publishing requirement and you need to get an app onto the iPad in the next 3 weeks or next 3 months, then this would be a sensible route to look at. So first option is what I've called here flipbook style, and that really is more like getting PDFs onto the iPad, and those kinds of solutions do vary. Some of them will enable you to do your own branded apps with that kind of PDF flipbook approach. Others, you may have your content sitting inside of somebody else's branded app. Advantages: very quick to do, low level of work, low maintenance. But disadvantages, one size fits all on the content, very little control over content enrichment, and also you may lose branding control as well in that particular case. At the other end of the spectrum are custom developed solutions, and they might be developed internally if you're fortunate enough to have your own in-house development team, or externally. And as I said earlier, with unlimited time and unlimited budget, you can do pretty much anything you want. Advantages, if you're doing that internally, will be knowledge of existing systems, flexibility for how you implement features inside those apps, a richness of features, integration, security, control. Disadvantage is primarily going to be cost, extremely costly to develop and maintain, because it does require highly skilled developers, may well require internal IT support. And related to cost is not just the cost of that initial app development, but both ongoing maintenance and the fact that whenever you create a new app, chances are you're going to have to do all of that work all over again. The other option is digital publishing software, and they tend to be from vendors like Quark that are focused on page layout and design and corporate publishing. But what's interesting is they are very rapidly closing the gap with some of the custom developed solutions. So key capabilities, you should expect to be able to have your branded app, very customizable. You get complete design control and hopefully features that are unique to the iPad. Option to sell content, secure automation, internal apps as well as in external apps, and enhanced content with additional web content. So primary advantage is that they tend to be more affordable than custom solutions and more feature rich than the flipbook style PDF approaches. There is a fourth approach, and that approach is to take the out-of-the-box functionality that you get from digital publishing software and combine that with custom development. I know in Quark's case, we have the ability to let our customers use our development framework, so they can take our base functionality and then they can supplement that with additional features, but they don't have to invest in all of the base functionality that's always already provided out of the box with the digital publishing solutions. So you can get started faster, but it's more affordable than having to build a custom app right from scratch. And just to highlight those compromises, you can see there really directly proportional richness of features to the cost and how much you want to invest in developing those apps. And I guess I could have drawn that custom app right down from low to high, because just because you're doing custom apps, that doesn't mean that they are necessarily feature rich, but typically when someone invests in doing custom apps, it's because they are after some particular features. And just to talk, again about cost comparisons between these, you can see that over time, certainly initially your custom app development is going to be a lot more, but you should expect your ongoing maintenance costs for a custom app to be more as well, in terms of updates for new versions of the operating system, or if you want to add new features. Whereas if you've gone down an approach with digital publishing software, for example, those are things you should expect to get that are provided because someone else has done the development work, and you just get that as part of your agreement with the vendor. And the other aspect of cost is developing additional apps, so for other platforms. So you can see again that the initial cost on the custom apps is substantially more than the other options. It will drop down in terms of maintenance, but then when you start to add additional platforms, you start to almost pay the same cost again when you look at maintenance of your original app and then developing the new ones. The cost increase for both flipbooks and for digital publishing software, but relatively speaking, those costs are much lower. Now, I have included a chart here that just compares those different options and what you should expect to get. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but we will provide the presentation as a follow-up to this e-seminar, so you can look through this at your own leisure. So desktop software sits firmly in that low volume, handcrafted area. But what about the top area there, that top quadrant where I want automated high volume? And that really is where we would put enterprise solutions and enterprise app creation. And so we'll now talk a bit more about that and sustainability. So there are lots of advantages to handcrafted apps, and we saw how great looking some of those were. Disadvantages, though, are similar level of development for each app you do on the different platforms, and we looked at that. How you get content into those apps, that could be you sending an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document to a development team who are copying and pasting content into an app. A lot of redundancy, a lot of opportunity for error, lack of compliance control, which can have some relationship certainly to that error from copying and pasting. Manual review and approval workflows. If you're doing a lot of publishing, then that's going to be an issue in terms of sending PDFs around by email and trying to incorporate feedback from 5 different people from an email. It doesn't tend to be a very efficient way to review and approve content. Often those apps are mass produced, they're not individualized or personalized depending on who it is that's using them, and it's not sustainable. It is if you're doing 1, 2, 3, 4 apps or publications a year, but if you're doing hundreds or thousands, it really isn't. So what's the solution? So it's probably obvious the solution is to streamline and automate, but how do you do that? So firstly, you want to streamline and automate the authoring process. Secondly, the collaboration, the workflow, and then thirdly, it's not just about what you do in digital, it's about what you do in all of the other channels. So it's about automating multi-channel in general. We know that the teams that have to do this probably have less people than they had 5 years ago, and less budget, and 3 times as many places that they need to try and get this content to. So that really doesn't scale if you're doing it in a manual way. And in order to automate publishing, you have to use XML. And XML really is the only consistent format that you can use for this process.
So before you go on, Gavin, you just introduced a a topic that I think we should stop on for a second, which is, wait a second, what is XML? There are a lot of people listening today to the e-seminar who may or may not be familiar with XML or structured content. They just want to get to the iPad. So can you ease us into the transition on why that's important?
Absolutely. So XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. It's an international open standard. It was developed by the W3C committee. But I would say it's really only in recent years that adoption of XML has really accelerated. One of the important things about XML is it's not proprietary. It's not only machine readable, it's also human readable. So if you get your content into a structured XML format, then you can be pretty much guaranteed that that content is not going to be left standing and made redundant as systems and software solutions change in the future. And I know in the past that's been the case where content was locked into a particularly proprietary database format, and then it's costly or impossible to try and reuse that content in the future. XML really gets over that and makes sure that your content is future-proofed, but also it describes the structure of your content, and that is just critically important when you're talking about automation. You don't want to know how something looks, you want to know what it is. I don't want to know that this headline is bold, I want to know that it's a headline, and how that headline might be deployed in my iPad app may be different to how it's deployed in my Android app, which may be different to how it looks on my website, and different to how it appears in print. The important thing is I know what that content is, I know how it should be used, where it should be used. If there are compliance issues and disclosures that need to be incorporated, then the information I need to look that up in a database is included inside that XML. So it really is the only absolutely consistent format that enables you to automate the publishing process. So with all of that said, XML is almost irrelevant in terms of what we're talking about here, because the most important thing is about structuring content. And ideally, you want to even hide away from your content creators that they are creating XML. They want to be focused on content creation, not on formatting, not on copying and pasting to reuse content. You want to give them tools that they can efficiently create XML and structured content without having to get into the nitty-gritty of what XML is.
You know, and to wrap that idea up, I think one of the ways that I like to think about XML or structured content is that it's media independent. So as you said, once you set it up or create that content once, it can then be pushed to any output type.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're talking here about is not just publishing to the iPad, we're talking about setting yourself up to publish no matter where you need to publish to. And so what do we call all of that? Well, the name we use and the name that a lot of people in the industry use is dynamic publishing. And dynamic publishing is about automation, it's about personalization, it's about creating structured content to be able to publish in a far more efficient way than you can without it. But looking at that as a diagram, it covers the whole publishing process right through from content creation to content delivery. And it starts by creating structured content at the beginning. And as I said, that's typically going to be XML, but the fact that it's XML is less important than the fact that it's structured and it's known content. That then is managed inside of a dynamic publishing solution in terms of workflow, collaboration, automation. That could be integrated with third-party databases. So if you're a financial services organization, that may be going to real-time stock and other information that's feeding into your app. Integrating with content management systems like Microsoft SharePoint or IBM FileNet, and then publishing that content out to multiple channels. And if you follow the digital stream through and you see the iPad there, that may also be going through a delivery server to automate getting that content to internal employees. Now, as I said, handcrafted may be relevant to you even as an enterprise because you have one-off apps that it's important to handcraft, or also because you're in a rush to get to the iPad. And I wanted to give you an indication of kind of timescales for different implementation solutions. So it's certainly possible to get onto the iPad very fast. If you wanted to be on the iPad in 3 weeks' time and you happen to have content ready, if you're committed, that's certainly something you can do if you move quickly, and you'd probably be using either those flipbook style approaches or digital publishing software. The same would go for if you had a slightly longer period of 3 months. If you had that kind of time, you may also consider adding custom development into the mix. Again, the advantages are you can get there fast and you get design control. The disadvantage on both of those is if you're doing this on a large scale, it's just not sustainable. So if you have slightly longer to put a solution in place, then we would absolutely recommend that you look at implementing a dynamic publishing solution. And that brings a lot of advantages that go just beyond iPad publishing. So you get efficiencies to all of your other channels, to print to web. You get to future-proof what you're doing. Right now, it's all about the iPad, but is it all going to be about the iPad in 12 months, 5 years, 10 years? Well, if you are creating structured content within the context of a dynamic publishing solution, that doesn't matter. You can be absolutely confident that you are set up no matter what that next publishing channel is going to be for your enterprise. And you're going to get some substantial cost savings. We know that cost efficiency is a large driver in enterprises right now and has been for some time. And so you should be looking probably at an in-year return on the investment. And you get that through simplification of processes, through consistent business models across the enterprise. And you can see there much faster time to market as well. Now, implementing a dynamic publishing solution is not without pain, so we're not going to pretend otherwise, because this is not like downloading some software and developing an iPad app. It's going to require all of the things that implementing an internal solution would, which is working cross-functionally with other departments, change management, having a look at how you work now, what your workflows and processes are, and how you might want to adapt or map them into a dynamic publishing workflow. And it's going to require an investment which is well beyond typical digital publishing or flipbook solutions. But equally, you need to balance against that the huge cost efficiencies and the fact that really you're going to be building a sustainable digital publishing solution. So let's just make this a little bit more concrete and talk about some real solutions here for doing this. And we'll look at Quark's solutions in both the desktop and the enterprise area. So in the desktop software area, we have Quark Express working with App Studio for digital publishing. And then in the enterprise solution space, we have Quark's dynamic publishing solutions. App Studio works with Quark Express 9, and the real main driver and premise behind App Studio is to enable anyone to create their own apps without having to be a programmer. So it includes tools for app design of the content and adding interactivity, for creating your branded app, for testing the iPad app either on your actual iPad or in the previewer, and then publishing that to the App Store using the publishing portal. What we tried to do, though, is to make sure that whatever we build on the desktop can scale well to the enterprise. So you can then extend App Studio to include internal and external apps, have security, have user role-based access to content, storing all of your publishing assets, single source XML-based publishing, review, approve, edit over the web, and digital delivery and offline content. And you saw some of that in the Quark Gateway app that I showed you earlier, an example of how you could build that kind of sales enabling resource. And now going back to that dynamic publishing diagram, if we add Quark specific product sets on top of that, you can see we have Quark XML Author, which is a tool for Microsoft Word that enables your content creators to create structured XML content without having to know that's what they're doing. So behind the scenes, we are managing and maintaining XML, but to the user, they're just creating content in Microsoft Word in a guided content creation experience. That content is then managed, mapped, automated, and published through Quark Publishing System, which integrates into multiple databases, and then dynamically automates the output of that content. And it doesn't have to automate all of it. It could automate 80% and then it could go to someone else for hand finishing and completion, or it could automate it right through to publishing. And you'll see that we have a delivery server there for digital apps, which enables you to streamline getting content as soon as content is added into the system and it's assigned a particular status and given to certain users or certain user roles in an organization. That content can be dynamically streamed right through to the iPad that the sales engineer in the field is using. So why Quark? Well, one thing is that we've been doing this, relatively speaking, for a long time now, worked with a lot of organizations to enable them to get to the iPad and to build a sustainable digital publishing strategy. And we have a lot of deep vertical market expertise. So our customers are in government, in financial services, manufacturing, life sciences, and publishing. And we have a pretty deep understanding of what the requirements are in those various industries. So, sustainable. I think if you're doing high volume publishing, as we talked about, handcraft building of apps is not going to be a sustainable solution for you. But we really believe that dynamic publishing is the only sustainable digital strategy for enterprises that want to go to the iPad and to other media. So with that, I will hand you back to Julie. Thank you very much.
Before we wrap up, Gavin, let me go back to a couple of questions that came in. The first one is around ROI, and the question is, what kind of ROI can you typically expect to get from using a dynamic publishing approach? So the answer there is really that you should expect different results depending on the industry you're in, but generally you should expect to see three types of ROI. For example, in the area of cost savings and productivity. First of all, you'll be using less staff to reach more channels, and you'll also be publishing to more channels more efficiently and faster. The second area is in information quality. You'll be able to produce material that's more consistent and with fewer errors. And then if you're in an industry that is regulated, such as financial services or other types of industries, you'll be able to reduce your risks and costs associated with regulatory compliance. And finally, you should see a return in increased customer satisfaction because you will be able to deliver information to all the channels that your customers, both internal and external, expect. Then second, there's a question on advice to get started. For that, I'd just like to point you to a series of e-seminars that are available on Quark.com. You'll find those existing resources to view at your convenience, and also you might consider looking at the dynamicpublisher.com, a blog that has some contributions from leading experts in the field of structured authoring, automated publishing, and dynamic publishing in general. So to conclude, we will be sending you the slides following the recording. You will be able to access the recording as well, and we will send you, as we said, the Apps in the Enterprise white paper. Do visit Quark.com when you have a chance, and we thank you again for your participation today. Gavin, any final words?
I realize there are certainly some questions that we haven't managed to get to in today's e-seminar, and perhaps after you've digested this, you may have additional questions that you want to throw at us as well. So our email addresses are on screen. Please feel free to note those down and send us emails directly, and we'd be more than happy to follow up with you. And of course, Quark would be delighted to be able to partner with you to help you take your apps to the enterprise and develop a sustainable digital publishing strategy for your business. So thank you, Julie, and thank you very much for attending.